I have a couple more discussions to have, inshallah, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. The next thing that we have is regarding the person who is fasting. So whose fast is valid? Whose fast is considered an actual fast according to Islamic law? So the conditions that the scholars mention is that one, the person is Muslim. Two, that they have reached the age of discernment. That's around 5-6 years old, when the child is able to clothe themselves, they're able to go to the bathroom by themselves, they're able to kind of identify what things are harmful, what things are not harmful for them, like fire is harmful, etc. So that's like the age of discernment, 6-7, when they start to have a little bit of like the cognitive abilities to be able to engage in the action out of their own willingness. And the third is that the person is not experiencing menstrual or postnatal bleeding. So anyone who meets these three criteria, whenever they fast, whether it's an obligatory fast or recommended fast, it can count as a real fast. Now, when is sort of the next level after that is when is fasting obligatory on a person? Well, that's a person that is Muslim, of sound mind, has reached puberty, and has the ability to fast. So this is the criteria, kind of the typical way in which the scholars will explain these criteria is by explaining what is the opposite of it. And so that will tell us who it is not obligatory on. So somebody who's not a Muslim, obviously fasting is not obligatory on them. It's a secondary thing after you become Muslim. Second, of sound mind, somebody who's not of sound mind, that person, fasting is not obligatory on them. And typically, that will be a determination that is made by a Muslim psychologist or psychiatrist, determine whether a person qualifies for fasting to be obligatory on them. The third is the person reaching puberty, because that's the age at which we are now morally accountable for all of our actions. Obligations become obligations, prohibitions become prohibitions. Before that, it's recommended to do good things. It's encouraged not to do bad things. But until that point, nothing is going to be held. We're not going to be held accountable for anything. The last one here is the person has the ability to fast. So this is going to include the physical ability of the person. The person is physically able to spend the entire day without food and drink. And if somebody is not able to, then it's not obligatory. And we'll see that in the coming slides. And also the second thing is includes here is it has the legal ability. And this relates to the condition you saw on the previous page, where somebody who is in menstrual bleeding or postnatal bleeding, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam have told us that this is a person that is not going to fast at that time. They will make up their fasting. And so that person does not have the legal ability to fast in this current moment. There's a side discussion here, because in the previous two slides we saw something about the age of discernment, it's like 6-7 years old. We saw something about the age of puberty. So the prophetic model of nurturing obligations is layered. The Prophet ﷺ taught us that at the age of 7, a child is made aware of the obligations that will come onto them. They're taught through incentives. Like if you pray, you'll get a candy or whatever the incentive system is that the parent comes up with for the child. But whatever those incentives are, that needs to be created at 7. So they're starting to incorporate prayer, incorporate fasting into their lives. Of course, they're not viable yet, but we need to start practicing. At 10 is when the parents have to teach their children that there are consequences for not meeting obligations. Whatever those consequences might be, whether it's like, you can't have, you won't be able to play games for the weekend or whatever they are, whatever is appropriate for your parent-child conversation, that's where it happens around 10. The idea is that by the time the child hits puberty, it is already a habit. It's not hard. It's not like they have to start something completely fresh at the age of puberty. No, it's something that they're already doing. Now they're just going to do it with a little bit more effort because it's obligatory. And that is the prophetic model of it. A lot of times, unfortunately, in our community, in our society, maybe some of our parents have also taught us this way, we weren't really expected to do anything for our whole life, and then you hit puberty and you're like, wait, why aren't you doing this, and this? Well, changing a person's whole world, their daily routine completely, is not easy overnight. And so this is why the Prophet ﷺ taught us this gradual model. Now, who can leave the fast? And this is going to fall under that whole idea of ability to fast. The first category of people who can leave the fast is travelers. What is travel is if the journey is more than 48 miles one way. For such people, for travelers, they have the option to fast or not fast, although the scholars mention that fasting is superior for those who are able to. But if you feel that you're going to get weakened out or you might get sick because this is too hard, and you know yourself better than I do, you can't really deal well with fasting while traveling, then it's better for you to leave the fast and make it up. If your travel ends while the fast is ongoing, for example, today is the day of Ramadan, or let's say tomorrow is the day of Ramadan, and you come back home, your travel ends and it's like 3 p.m., still fasting. Like the fasting day is over. So now for the remaining time of the year, you have to abstain from all of those things that we have to abstain from fasting. It's not going to count as a fast, but out of respect for the day, out of honor for the day, you abstain for the rest of the day. And then you'll make up the fasting for Ramadan. And the final thing related to travelers is you break the fast according to where you are. And the typical place where we see this today is if I'm on a plane, traveling coast to coast. Our religion is tied to physical markers. Like the rulings are tied to physical markers of the world around us. So the fast starts when dawn happens in the morning at Fajr time, when like the light spreads across the horizon before the sun comes up. And then the fast ends when the entire sun dips below the horizon. In the plane, I have the ability to look outside and see those things. Even if I'm not on the window seat, I can turn on the cameras on the plane or whatnot, or I can just switch over and look through the window. And I can see when the sun has disappeared. When the sun has disappeared, I can break my fast. And that's it. I mean, sometimes you'll end up having a really short fast, sometimes you'll end up having a really long fast, but that's just the reality of it. One way it helps, one way it doesn't. And this is how it balances. The second category of people who can leave the fast is sick people. When there's a genuine fear of sickness, there's a genuine fear of the sickness worsening or prolonging because of the fast. Now, under this, usually the scholars mention that who is going to make that determination? Well, one possibility is that you've already experienced this in the past. Like you tried fasting while you were sick and it got worse. Or you tried fasting in a particular time and your sickness got worse. So that's one possibility. The second possibility is that you ask a practicing Muslim physician. Why do they stipulate practicing Muslim physician? Well, because that practicing Muslim is going to understand the importance of fasting. They're not going to say, oh yeah, whatever, like don't fast, that's not it. They'll actually consider it, and they will take real account of the importance of the obligation and compare it to your physical health, There's two categories under sick people. One is when you have chronic sickness or old age and you're no longer able to fast at all. For such a person, they don't need to fast at all. Instead of fasting, they're going to pay a compensatory charity for each day of fasting, each day that they were not able to fast. And the compensatory charity is the same thing we mentioned earlier, is half of a prophetic salt measure, or its value for each day. When you have acute sickness, where you're sick for a little while, but you're expecting to recover, then you will make up the fast after you recover, and that's it. The third category of people who leave the fast is women on menstruation and postnatal bleeding. There's a whole discussion, and there's a separate chapter of study in the science of fiqh on the detailed rulings of menstruation and postnatal bleeding. I just put down like high-level stuff here, which is menstruation for legal purposes has certain minimum and maximum number of days, and the reason for that is because it fits into the practicality of the religion. If somebody, so the minimum that I mentioned here is one of the opinions, one of many opinions, is 3 days. So anything that is less than 3 days is not technically considered menstruation. Anything that is more than 10 days, beyond the 10-day mark, that is no longer considered technically menstruation, which requires you to leave the fast, which requires you to leave the prayers. 3 to 10 is sort of the range in which you're living. And there's a whole discussion about between one menstrual cycle and the next, there needs to be at least 15 days of purity between them. There's more details that, inshallah, we can talk about some other time, but that's kind of just like the high level thing. Postnatal bleeding, there's no minimum time for it, but the maximum is 40 days. So if someone, for example, has postnatal bleeding for like 100 days, they're not going to be like in that category for all 120 days. It's just the first 40 days. For this category, fast must be made up, but prayers are forgiven. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not require prayers to be made up for women, but the fasts that are missed because of this will have to be made up. And you can see the wisdom in setting like upper limit to that. So making up to 10 fasts is reasonable. But if someone has to make up like 15, 16, 18, 20 fasts, it gets really hard. The last category is a woman who is pregnant or breastfeeding when there's a genuine fear for herself and the child, or just the child. And again, it's going to go back to either past experience or other people around me who have had that experience, or it's going to be the Muslim physician, the gynecologist, the OBGYN, whoever it is, that will help you make that determination. And if that genuine fear is present, then you just skip the fast and you make it. Making up fasts. If someone leaves a fast without a valid excuse, valid excuses were the previous 4 categories, 5 categories. Without a valid excuse, that person is sinful and they must make those fasts up as soon as possible. If someone is about to pass away or close to passing away and they have fasts left that they were not able to do, but they have the ability to make them up, what is recommended for that person is they should stipulate some money in their will that they're going to leave behind in their inheritance that is going to be used to pay that compensatory charity per day. Because that's part of me leaving my legacy behind, is I need to make sure that my obligations are fulfilled. And so I need to be conscious of that. And for example, if I have, for whatever reason, Allah knows best, and there could be valid or invalid reasons for this, somebody has 100 days of fasting that they were supposed to do, it was obligatory on them, but they just never did. Now this person should actually write down in their will that I have 100 days of fasting left. And I would like my heirs to use some of my wealth to pay off a fidya for them. And that's part of my responsibility. If I die without making that will, the heirs are not responsible for doing that. Because it's my personal obligation, it's not theirs. So that's someone who is about to pass away or passes away with fast left. If someone passes away or is about to pass away and they left a fast with an excuse, and that excuse continues until they die, then they don't have to worry about it. There's no fidya, there's no compensatory charity, there's no making out, nothing. That person, inshallah, is in the hands of Allah and Allah will forgive, inshallah. The last point here is that when we are fasting a voluntary fast, the scholars say that we are allowed to break the voluntary fast for a reason. And one of these reasons they mentioned is if you are a host, hosting people in your house for food, or if you are a guest invited to someone's house for food. And so they mentioned that this is a category specifically that is mentioned quite often as a real reason why you are allowed to break your fast. And all you'll have to do though is you'll have to make up that fast later. Scholars mentioned that even though it's a voluntary fast, the fact that you have started the fast, you have now made it obligatory on yourself to finish it. And so if you break it, it's okay to break it, it's not sinful, but just make sure you make it up. Okay, that is the end of fast. We have a couple more things that we could go through, or we can just go into question and answer, so I'll let people decide. The few things we have are one slide on etikaf, a couple of slides on zakat al-fitr, and a couple of slides on tarawih. I guess, are there a lot of questions? Any questions? And maybe we'll take questions right now on fasting, and then we can see how much time we have left. So any questions? Yes.
For the voluntary fast, are you just waiting for non-obvious reasons, but just because you're hungry, it's a voluntary fast?
Yeah, I mean, then you can, according to many of the scholars, it's fine to break voluntary fast for any reason, but you also have to make it up.
For demonstration time, usually it has to not come in before Fajr. So during the year, usually it's like the prayer that you it's meant to when you have to. How does that work? Going demonstration at different points.
So if it starts during the day at any point, that fast is not going to be a fast, a complete fast. So that will have to be made up later. But the point that I was mentioning is if it ends right before Fajr, that fast will actually be fine. Even if you don't get a chance to take a shower before Fajr. Yeah. Yes.
Is it like specific to a region or if like South Bay or different other regions in the area, and within that there's different mosques as well, different so do we get like we use our document to see which one makes more sense to us?
It's a very good question on the 3 methods of the start of the month and the end of the month. And like we have a lot of communities in the Bay Area and different Muslims will use different methods of determining it. So how do we figure out which one we're going to be following? So generally, the rule is that whichever masjid I primarily attend, or I'm primarily planning to attend Ramadan, that's the masjid that I follow, just to be consistent with that masjid. I mean, technically where I live, for example, like there could be like 4 masjids equal distance from my house, and all of them are considered different, for example. But it really depends on where I'm going to be going in Ramadan. Questions? Yes.
How is zakat calculated in a student loan?
So zakat, well, zakat's a whole separate discussion chapter. Maybe we can do a full at some point. But the way that scholars look at debt for zakat is if there is any debt that is owed within the year, the amount that is owed within the year, that is how much you will subtract from your wealth. If you have debt that's owed later on, and this is a big thing for example, mortgages, because people have a really large amount of debt. And with the whole mortgage, you're basically going to have 0 at the end of it, right? If you subtract all of it, but they say, look at how much of it you have to pay within a year.
So that's based on
Yes. Yeah, it's basically like this. And so you subtract that amount from your total assets, and then you use that the amount that's left after that to calculate 2.5%. Yes.
Is it permissible, let's say you fast the whole month of Ramadan, but maybe there was a day where you weren't sure if you broke you started your fast on time, or if there was something that broke it. Is it permissible during a voluntary fast to be intention to cover any missed 12 fasts? Like, can you have that dual intention?
It's best to just have a single clear intention.
Okay.
If you are doubtful about it, the scholars they say that we only really consider like things where you're certain. So like if I was like, oh, did I start on time? Did I not start on time? I wasn't really sure. There's no way for me to figure that out for sure. I assume that it was on time. Like that's like the default assumption there. Unless like for example, hypothetically, you were like looking at the clock in your room and you were eating, and then later on you find out that clock stopped an hour early and it hasn't moved, and you were eating in Fajr time. Like you walk out of the room and it's like 8 a.m. Now you are for sure have started too late. So that would be a fast.
And then when making it up, it's fine to make it up on the day of first.
Yeah, but the intention would be for the obligation.
For obligation.
Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
I have an initial question topic. You mentioned that when you take turn 7, that's when you get the incentive. So before 7, do you even given the time of knowledge and incentive or no?
Well, so before 7, like it's the Prophet ﷺ didn't say anything specific, but some of the Sahaba they mentioned, before 7 is the age to play with kids. Again, they shouldn't really be burdened with anything. Of course, as part of nurturing, you might start to bring in a few things here and there, and that's more part of the wisdom of how you raise children, etc. You obviously have the wrong person to ask that. You should ask other people who have raised many children for that. But that's the general model that we get from the process of the Sahaba, is that at younger age, it's more about playing with them. And then after that, from 7 to 10, puberty-ish, that's when you're their friend. And then after that, you're their mentor or guide. And you're there for them where they need you. But you recognize that they're their own person. You really can't convince them or force them to do anything after that. It's impossible. Any questions? Okay. So let's quickly do a couple more things. And then we'll end. So i'tikaf is something that we translated in English as a spiritual retreat. The Prophet ﷺ would practice this every Ramadan, where he would spend time in the masjid, secluded from the world. Specifically, the Prophet ﷺ encouraged us to do it in the last 10 nights of Ramadan. And one of the purposes and one of the wisdoms that the scholars mentioned is that it helps us catch Laylatul Qadr. Laylatul Qadr is in the last 10 nights, one of the odd nights possibly. Some narrations say the 27th, some say 25th, some say 29th, some say 21st, 23rd. To maximize our chances of catching it, if we spend the 10 nights, 10 days in the masjid, praying Tahajjud every night, reading Quran every night, we've caught it for sure. And it's one of the ways in which the Prophet made it an easier way for us to catch it. There's 2 requirements for an i'tikaf. One is intention to do i'tikaf, and number 2 is staying in a masjid for even a few moments. So of course, I can intend to stay for 10 days and stay for 10 days. Or I can intend i'tikaf and stay for 5 minutes and I'll still be rewarded for i'tikaf for those 5 nights. Sunnah is the last 10 nights of Ramadan. Leaving the masjid without a legitimate reason, legitimate being like you have to go to the bathroom that's outside the masjid, you have to go get food, or food is outside the masjid, or whatever, these legitimate things that you really need. Other than those things, anything else, any other reason why you leave the masjid, or if you engage in intimacy, that will end the spiritual retreat. That will end it. The scholars encourage us to make an intention whenever we enter the masjid of i'tikaf. Even if we're in there for like 2 minutes, 5 minutes, as I walk in, if I make the intention of i'tikaf, then inshallah I'll be rewarded for every moment that I am in the masjid. And I'm already there, so I might as well double up extra rewards. So that's on i'tikaf. The next discussion is on zakat al-fitr. This is an obligatory charity at the end of the month of Ramadan. It's obligatory on every Muslim who is alive after Fajr on Eid day. So, for example, if someone was alive all Ramadan but passed away before Fajr, that person would not have zakat al-fitr on them. If somebody was born after Fajr on Eid day, or somebody became Muslim after Fajr on Eid day, that person would also not have zakat al-fitr on them. It's the third condition for when it is obligatory on a person is when they have wealth in excess of the threshold of zakat that we saw, the minimum amount you need to have for zakat, and which is roughly $7,500. So if you have that much in assets, after removing basic needs and debts that are current, then it's obligatory on you to pay zakat. Even if you don't meet that criteria, you can still pay it. Because who are the people who are receiving this? These are people who don't have any food on the day of Eid. And so this is the opportunity, this is the gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to all of those less fortunate in our community to be able to have food on the day of Eid for themselves, for their families, for their kids. For them to have new clothes for themselves, for their families, and for their kids. And so thinking about it from that perspective, maybe even if we're not at that threshold, we still try to pay it. If you have the capacity, you must also pay on behalf of your Muslim financial dependents as well. So your children, spouse, etc. When is this paid? It can be paid after the first of Ramadan. And usually nowadays it is recommended to pay it early so that the money actually reaches people by the day of Eid, or a day before Eid. It's recommended to be paid before the Eid prayer. And it's disliked if delayed past the Eid prayer, although it will still be an obligation that needs to be fulfilled. So even if I missed it like last year or 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I should pay it. It's something that is still a debt on me to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I have to pay. The amount that is due, the scholars, they mention a number of measurements, but usually every masjid will advertise a monetary amount. I think last year a lot of the masjids had like $15 per person, like $12 per person, something like that. And so whatever the amount is that the local masjid decides, then that's the amount that we're going to be paying for zakat al-fitr. The last conversation that we have in this presentation is on the Tarawih, the night vigil prayer. There's a lengthy history of the Tarawih, which is very interesting, but we'll kind of skip on it for now because of time. And part of the discussion on the history of Tarawih gives us a number of different positions on the number of rakahs in Tarawih. And so we'll see some people who pray 8, some people who pray 10, some people who pray 20, some people who pray 36, some people who pray 40. A number of different possibilities there. But instead of like focusing on the discussion about the number of rak'ahs, what all my teachers always tell us is there's an order of priorities. And that's what the mindset with which we should approach this. The first priority is praying all 5 prayers on time, right? Because those are the obligations. The Tarawih is optional, it's recommended, it's not required. So if I'm missing multiple prayers a day, and I'm worried about making it to Tarawih and like praying a certain number of rakahs for Tarawih, I'm prioritizing the wrong thing. I just start with praying the 5 prayers on time. Second, after that, is to pray the Isha and Fajr or Fajr in congregation. There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that whoever prays Isha in congregation gets the reward of praying half the night. And whoever prays Fajr in congregation gets the reward of the other half of the night. And so just by praying Isha and Fajr in congregation, I'm already getting the reward for praying the entire night. So that's the second level of priority. After that, praying any amount of Tarawih. You are going to be the best judge of your own time, your own difficulties, your own responsibilities. How much time can you take out to pray Tarawih every day? If it's just 2, you pray 2, but you're consistent with the 2. If you do 4, you're consistent with 4. 6, whatever the amount is. Some certain days on the weekend, maybe you push yourself a little bit more. But that's for you to make a determination. And remember, this is the third on the priorities list. After that, the fourth level is praying the full amount with your congregation. Whatever they're praying, 8, 20, whatever it is. Praying all the way to when the Imam finishes. Because there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that whoever prays until the Imam ends his prayer gets the reward of praying the whole night. That's the fourth. And the fifth is, let's say your masjid only prays 8. We have a sufficient scholarly precedent for 20 rak'ahs of Tarawih. So then you can go home and pray a little bit extra and complete the 20 by yourself. It doesn't even have to be very long. It can be short rak'ahs, because you already prayed longer rak'ahs in the masjid. It can be something short, like 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes by yourself at home. And you get to the larger amount. So this is the order of priorities, and this is the way that our teachers have always taught us to prioritize these things. The way that it's prayed, and most of you are probably familiar with this, so I won't spend too much time here. The time of Tarawih is after Isha prayer and before Fajr prayer. It's prayed 2 units at a time, and there's a rest after every 4 units. So if the masjid is praying 20, there'll be 2 salam, rest. 2 salam, rest, and then continue all the way, and then you finish 20, and then you pray with it. It's an emphasized sunnah for men and for women, and it's a communal recommendation. Like, if some people are not doing it in the community, then everyone is liable for missing the sunnah. That's what this means. Some people should be doing it in the masjid. If no one is doing it in the masjid, there's a problem, and we need to fix that. Women should also attend the masjid, the Tarawih in the masjid, if they have no obligations that make it difficult, because sometimes women will have certain obligations because of which it's hard for them to go to the masjid and spend like an hour and a half, 2 hours every night. So if that's not the case, if they have other obligations, they should prioritize those, and inshallah they get rewarded for attending the Tarawih prayer as well. And the second thing is, if they will not be able to pray as much at home. Like, they're able to pray, but they won't be able to pray as long or as many rak'ahs at home. And so in that case, the scholars recommend that women should also attend the masjid to pray their Tarawih. The last conversation here is the balance between finishing the Quran and Tarawih versus having a larger congregation. Generally, if you have smaller Taraweehs, you will have more people showing up and staying till the end. And then obviously there are certain hadiths that talk about the virtue of reciting the whole Quran in the month of Ramadan. So the scholars will have different opinions on this, and usually what they say is, it goes back to every community figuring out what is best for their congregation. If they do like a full Khatam Quran Tarawih and like 5 people are going to show up, then maybe it's a good idea to have a shorter Tarawih. And if people would stay and they want for there to be a full Khatam of the Quran, then maybe it's a good idea to do it, because you'll get the extra virtue of that as well. So it's just, it's one of those things where there isn't a clear answer, and that's intentional. It's part of the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, leaving certain things ambiguous. This is the last slide that I have. It's on the witr prayer. The reason why I have a slide on this is just because different masjids will pray this differently, and so I just wanted to have a slide on it just to mention it. There are 2 main methods that you'll find on the side around this area. There's the first method is where you pray 2, you say salam, you stand up, you pray 1 more, and then you go to ruku, and that last rak'ah, you stand up and ruku, and the imam will do the dua aloud. The second major method that you'll find in some of the masajid in this area is where all 3 of them are together. Like Maghrib, you have 2, you'll sit down for the tashahhud, you'll stand up, no salam, and you'll recite, the imam will recite Surah Al-Fatiha, recite the surah, and while they're standing, they'll say Allahu Akbar again, and everyone will silently recite the dua of qunut. The same dua that the imam recites out loud in the other version, they'll recite that quietly, everyone will recite that individually. Usually that will be shorter for that version of the there's a supplication of qunut that everyone's encouraged to learn and memorize so they can read it in the witr prayer. If you don't know it, the minimum that you can do is just say Allahumma ighfirli 3 times. Oh Allah, forgive me 3 times. That fulfills the minimum amount for the qunut, the dua of qunut in witr prayer. The last thing I have here is on wiping the face. This is specifically for when the version of the witr where you raise your hands after ruku and you're saying Ameen behind the imam. When you finish it, sometimes people will wipe their face after the dua is done. So even though there are hadith in many of the collections that show that wiping the face after dua is recommended and is established, That's not for within the prayer. The scholars are specific in noting the exception that in the prayer you do not wipe the face. That is not an action. So finish the dua behind the imam, and you just drop your hands and you continue. So that's the end of our slideshow. Any questions on any of the other things we did after fasting? Yes.
For the praying Jama'ah with in the masjid for women, is that the same need for men? And then also, should they get to
Yeah, that's a very good question. So for men, it's always a recommendation to pray Tarawih in the masjid. If there are sufficient people praying in the masjid, then they can pray at home with like their own Jama'ah, for example, or if that encourages them to review more of their Quran or recite more of the Quran at home, then that's totally fine. We have examples of this from the Sahaba, where there would be like a big congregation in the masjid, and people would have like smaller congregations in their houses as well. So the point is that you're making the nights lively with Quran and prayer. So as long as that's being achieved and the masjid is not being abandoned, that's fine, even for me. But the thing that was a little bit distinct for women was that if women have certain obligations that make it difficult for them, then inshallah they'll get a reward for it while taking care of their obligations as well, and doing whatever they can. So I was talking about Tarawih. Yeah. So for the hadith about Isha and Fajr and Jama'ah, the wording of the Prophet in that hadith, it says, "Man sallal Isha fi jama'ati," and "Man sallal Fajr fi jama'ati." So that doesn't specify that it's in a masjid. So it could even be a Jama'ah at home. Of course, the masjid will be even far superior to that, because you have multiplied by 25, 27 times more. But that virtue is achieved by praying in congregation, wherever you are. You had a second question? What was the other part of the
I
question?
think the second question was about i'tikaf. Is that the same like for women?
Oh, yes. Yeah, so for i'tikaf, for men, the only place that they can do it is in the masjid. For women, some of the scholars say that women are allowed to do it in a part of their house, which they designate as like their prayer area in the house. But even those scholars will say that if the woman doesn't have a place in the house, and there is sufficient facilities being provided in the masjid, then it's fine for her to also do i'tikaf in the masjid. But men have no option outside of the masjid for i'tikaf.
I recently read that, or I had heard something along the lines of praying part of salawat in the masjid is almost binding upon men for all of them, and that some people hold the opinion that it's permissible to pray at home, but sinful. Did you heard that? And I was wondering if you could voice over that, because I just recently heard that.
The scholars have had a long-standing difference of opinion on what is the ruling of praying in the masjid congregation for men. Some have said that it's mandatory, some have said that it's highly recommended, some have said it's just recommended. But even those who say that it is mandatory, they specify that this is somebody who lives close to the masjid. Like somebody who can hear the adhan when it's being called, not with microphones, but like if it was somebody stood up on top of the building and called the adhan, you would be able to hear it from your house. Like you're in the same like 2-3 blocks, basically. So that's the person that would apply to directly. And if you think about it practically speaking, if someone lives 15 minutes away from the masjid, it's almost impossible for them to pray 5 minutes at the masjid, or 10 minutes away even. Unless you live less than 5 minutes away from the masjid, it's very hard to be there for 5 minutes every day. Yes.
Can you combine the intentions for Tarawih and Tahajjud? Let's say your masjid prays only 8, so you go back home, sleep, pray 15 minutes before Suhoor or like earlier, and pray the 12 extra as Tahajjud and Tarawih.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay.
There's no 40-day limit. So in 40 days, you have to start praying, but you have to make the fasts. You can start fasting after the 40 days as well.
So technically yes, but if it is having health impacts, because oftentimes a person might be very weak because of all the thinking. So in that case, that would fall under the ruling of sickness, more so. Because if the fasting makes it hard for the person to go through their day, so then they're going to fall under the category of sickness. So even though technically the menstruation or postnatal bleeding is no longer forcing that person to like not fast, they can fast now after the 40 days of post-nasal bleeding is done. But if it's causing them like immense weakness or it's potentially causing them sickness or harm to their bodies, then they can leave fasting for that other reason.
And what do you do about the days? You have to do 40 plus however many.
Yeah, so whatever number of days you miss would have to be made up. I mean, 40 would be past Ramadan, so I guess 30 would be all we get per year. It's very hard for people who have a child 1 year, in the second year, and the third year, and always aligns with Ramadan. And so then they have multiple Ramadans to make up. That's a very tough situation to be in. And so there were some Sahabiyat who were in that situation, and they would just make up slowly throughout their life. The Prophet did not tell them, oh, you have to make it up by a certain amount of time. It was more like, okay, you make it up with a reasonable schedule that works for you without making it too weak. Whether it's like a couple of days every month or a couple of days every week or whatever is something that you can do sustainably, do that as long as you're going towards that same goal of finishing all the fasting you have. So that's kind of the idea. And then at the end of the day, if you pass away while doing that, we hope that Allah will forgive us for the rest.
So every year those fasts will combine if you were
Yes. It will add up. It's kind of like a makeup fast is like a debt. And then another one's on top of that, and they keep adding. It's the same with missing the prayers as well. Like somebody who's not for menstruation or post-nasal bleeding, but outside of that, if someone misses a prayer for whatever reason, or I didn't pray for like a whole year of my life, like that's a debt. Obviously, I'm not like required to make it up tomorrow, like that's impossible. But like at least I'm making it up with some kind of consistency, some sustainable schedule that I've set out for myself, and I'm working on this. That's the idea. Last questions?
If a person intends to pray 20 rakat Tarawih and they walk in the masjid, they have started the Tarawih and they are on 12 rakat. So the person will pray the Isha prayer. Would they catch up prior to that 12 rakat or would they join the congregation and then do the rest of the rakat?
Yeah, there's a difference of opinion among the scholars on that question. The safer opinion that a lot of the scholars hold is that you just pray Isha on the side by yourself, and then you catch the Tarawih. Because the Imam is praying a optional prayer, and you are praying an obligatory prayer. An obligatory prayer is higher. It's like a higher intention. And so praying a higher intention prayer behind someone with a lower intention prayer, according to many of the scholars, is not wrong. Yeah, so the option that most of my teachers recommend is that you either, if there's a place outside of the main musalla where you have 2-3 people who come together and pray together, pray Isha together in congregation on the side, as long as it's not in the main prayer hall, you can do that. But if you're the only one that walks in, then you can just stand on the side, pray Isha, and then join the congregation for Tarawih.
And then would they skip the witr? And because the intention.
No, you can pray with them, and then you can complete any extra prayers after. Yeah. It's ideal for witr to be the last prayer of the night, but it's not required. Catching it with the Imam is better.
I have a follow-up question in that regard. So, like, you walk in and they pray Tarawih, and you make an intention for Salah, and they say salam, but you get up and finish the remaining 2 rakats. Is that possible?
Yes. So the scholars who allow praying Isha behind somebody who's praying Tarawih, they will say that you pray the 2 with the Imam, and then you finish the 2 on your own. Alright, any other questions? Final call? Alright, Jazakumullah khair, barakallahu fikum. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us all to reach Ramadan, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all of our needs. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant all of us the acceptance in this beautiful month of Ramadan, and make us as those who exit this month having been forgiven for all of our sins, and exit from this becoming better people than we were before we went in. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to witness many Ramadans in the future. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow every Ramadan in our life to be better than the previous one. And may Allah allow our last Ramadan on this earth to be the best Ramadan on this earth. آمين يا رب العالمين. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خير.
Ustadh Basil. We'll be having our volunteer meeting right here in this corner right after. Thank you all so much for joining.